Welcome to this webinar about the results of the study Trans Labor Market Wallet. In this webinar, we will look at how we work with different gender variables, how we work with the concept of gender in a trans context. Because gender matters, and if you want to do research about the living condition of trans people, if you want to do a gender analysis, you need to understand how gender and gender stereotypes affect trans people. Research often tends to refer to the group as a homogeneous third gender, or based on gender identity. And the latter is respectful, but we think reality is much more complex than that. Our hypothesis was our gendered position is defined by both our present, as in our current gender identity and our current perceived gender, and by our history, as in the gender that was assigned for us at birth. I will come back to that later on. So we asked a lot of questions about gender in the survey. We asked about gender identity, where people could select their gender identity, one or many, from a selection list, including the final option other. We asked about assigned gender at birth, which is what legal gender was assigned for you at birth. That's the same as the abbreviations AFAB and AMAB, assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth. We asked about legal gender, which was their current legal gender. We asked about gender expression. They could choose one of the alternatives, feminine, masculine, androgynous, both female and male. It varies. And finally, we asked about perceived gender. The question was, how do you think you are usually perceived by people around you if you think of all the people you meet in 1 month? And the answers could be one of mainly as man, woman, deviates from gender norms. It varies. I don't know. So, what did they answer? In Sweden, the answers was like this when it comes to gender identity. As we said, we have some overweights. Only 29% of our respondents in Sweden are women, 38% are men, and 58% answered something else than man, trans man, woman, trans woman. Most common gender identity is other, and within them, the most common is non-binary, followed by queer, trans-masculine, trans-feminine, gender fluid, and agender non-gender. As you see, this is more than 100% because they could choose more than one option. There were a lot of answers with more than one gender identity in both countries. If we look at Finland, we have less women. It's 20% of them, woman or trans woman, and more men, 48%. And almost the same when it comes to other. The other options are 57%. When it comes to gender identity, what we also can see is that the proportion of women is higher and the proportion of men is lower, higher up in the age we look in both countries. We don't really know why, but this is common in studies about trans people. It seems harder to reach older trans men, and they seem to be less organized. Or it might be that fewer assigned female at birth identify as trans in older groups. We don't really know. It's also interesting that so many are something else than men or women. Take a look at assigned gender at birth. It's 63% that are assigned female at birth and 34% that are assigned male at birth in both countries together. Our assigned gender at birth, regardless of if we are cis people or trans people, is often the same as perceived gender during childhood and youth, and for some trans people, sometimes until our middle-aged. It varies a lot depending on what time in life you go through a transition. And then, if we go to perceived gender, the gender people around us think we do have. Uh, it's 34% that are perceived as men, and 29% that are perceived as women, and 33% that are perceived as others. And as other is both as neither a woman nor a man, but a person who deviates from the gender norm, and it varies. That means it's a very heterogeneous group. And we also see that the higher proportion of women in Sweden corresponds to a higher proportion of assigned male at birth. That's not rocket science. Qualitative material confirms trans people know how they are perceived. So we do trust our answers in that question. And when we talked about perceived as other, it's important to know that we don't know how it varies. Does it varies about because of the gender expression, because of the situation, because of the surrounding, or because of something else? To dig deeper into gender, we created gender clusters. Clusters are mathematically calculated groups that have a lot in common in our data, where individuals in each group did answer similar in our questions. They were created from 4 variables: gender identity, assigned gender at birth, perceived gender, and gender expression. And we found that assigned gender at birth had the strongest explanatory value, but the other 3 variables also played a role. When we looked into these 4 gender variables, we found 3 gender clusters, 2 clusters of assigned female at birth, but 1 of assigned male at birth. What this is about is that trans women and non-binary assigned male at birth have responded similarly to questions about gender expression and perceived gender compared to trans men and non-binary assigned female at births. And when it comes to non-binary assigned female at birth compared to trans men, the non-binary have in a higher degree answered something outside the norm when it comes to gender identity and gender expression. That's why we got 1 cluster for assigned male at birth, but 2 different ones for assigned female at births. This likely affects how these 3 groups are affected. It's easier for trans men to be seen as men than for trans women to be seen as women. So the gender cluster with trans women and non-binary AMABs, they consist of AMABs that have a gender identity as female, trans woman, or to some extent non-binary. They are perceived as women or norm-breaking. They have female but to some extent mixed gender expression. So it's a rather heterogeneous group. And the cluster with non-binary AFABs, they are AFABs. They have other gender identities than man or woman. They are perceived as women or norm-breaking, and the gender expression often falls outside the typical female and male. And then we have the last cluster, the trans men. They are AFABs. The gender identity is male or trans man. They are perceived as men mostly, and the gender expression is predominantly male. Found that different gender factors affect different things to different extents and in different ways. In the other webinars, you will see that, for example, if you work in a male-dominated, female-dominated, or gender-balanced industry, that it's most influenced by gender assigned at birth. Structural position in the workplace also is most influenced by gender assigned at birth. But it is important to remember that age also is a factor here. And the economic situation also seems to be most influenced by gender assigned at birth when it comes to higher incomes. But exposure to harassment is most influenced by gender identity. So back to our hypothesis. If you remember, our gendered position is defined by both our present, our current gender identity, perceived gender, and by our history, what gender was assigned for us at birth. It looks like this hypothesis is proven. Thank you for listening. Now you can continue and take part in the other webinars about Fran's labor market wallet.